The question on how do I buy up to 10 properties and build a property empire has been coming up a lot more lately. And today, I'm going to show you what are the structures some people use and what lenders they use to accumulate a lot more properties. I'm your host, Tony Shah, and thanks for joining me on another episode of The Mortgage Chat. So this episode today is more for your ambitious investors that want to climb up the property ladder and build a massive portfolio and how to buy up to 10 properties like their friends and family has, right? So I'm going to show you what some of the structures my clients have used and what we implement for some of our clients. But one thing you have to understand is purchasing a property today and accumulating properties today is a lot more harder than it was back then in your call it 2015s, okay, when the property prices were still quite reasonable in comparison to today. Since 2015 till now, we've probably seen around 3 or 4 property booms, right? So I still remember when I purchased my own occupied property in New South Wales, Sydney, for $800,000. Now you're probably going to pick one of those up for around $1.6 million. So that's how much the property prices has been when I purchased that in 2016. So first thing I want to talk about is how do people accumulate so many properties? Well, the first thing is they probably accumulated a long time ago when the property prices were still quite low and the rental yield were quite substantial back then, right? So now in Sydney, you're probably going to buy something for, I call it $1 million, and your rental yield is probably going to be around 2.5% to 3%. While back then when they purchased it for 500, the rental yield was probably around 4.5%. So it was a lot easier to sustain, okay? So I have clients that only have one investment property all the way up to 20 investment properties, okay? Now, the clients that have 10 or more investment properties accumulated these property a long time ago. And as an example, I have a client that's similar to my age, 38, okay, a little bit older. He started investing back in 2015 when he was very young, and he bought a heck load of investment properties up in Brisbane area. Call it Marsden, call it Moreton Bay, call it North Lakes, etc. Right? So he actually purchased those properties when they were around $250,000 to $300,000 to $400,000, right? And the rental yield was actually quite high back then. For example, I still remember he purchased a property in Marsden for about $230,000, and the rental yield back then was around $350,000. Okay, so the rental yield was actually quite high back then. And I got another client, which is my uncle. He's actually got 20 properties in New South Wales, right, all around Leppington, Elderslie, Oran Park area. Okay, he's got around 3 in the metro areas in Sydney, but he's actually have a lot of properties around the southwest area because he actually purchased it when it was a house and land package, right? So I still remember he purchased a heck load of house and land packages back around 2012, 2013 for around $400,000. And these properties are now worth around $1 to $1.3 million, right? So when you hear these heavy investors that have a lot of property, they would have invested in these areas or started investing a long time ago. There is no way they're able to invest and purchase and accumulate 10 or more properties in today's market unless they have a massive income. And there is a few more things that you have to consider when you want to compare yourself to other investors, right? So you actually don't know what sort of investment properties they have, right? And if you want to compare yourself to other investors similar to your age and started only a few years ago, well, you have to understand what sort of investments they have, okay? So what's the value of the property, right? What's the rental yield? What's the growth of the property? Where do they invest? All that take into account of your investment portfolio, okay? You can have 10 dud properties that doesn't grow, that only give you good rental yield in comparison to you buying 2 or 3 good properties that have good capital growth and that you can sell and make a big profit off, all right? So it's never about just the number of properties. It's actually the asset itself and what your goals are. Are you chasing yield? Are you chasing the growth? Are you chasing a bit of both? Okay? So first, let's just break it up. How do people accumulate so many property today? And let's call it from 2020 onwards, okay? Because since COVID, 2020, the property market has actually probably boomed around 2 or 3 times itself, right, in certain areas. So let's just talk about how do people accumulate so much property under the individual name only, okay? So I actually got a video up here, all right? Look at that full video. It will show you the breakdown using first, second, and third tier lenders. And that's what it is, right? Some people actually keep buying under the individual name only with using first, second, third, and bottom of the barrel scraping 4th tier lenders, okay? But it's just not that, right? It's a mixture of the purchase price plus yield on the property they're buying as well. So they're not going to go out there and buy 10 properties that's worth $800,000 each, right? So more than likely they'll be buying properties worth $500,000, $600,000 with a 4 to 4.5% or even 5% rental yield. Okay, so a good example is, we've had clients that cap themselves borrowing under major lenders. Maybe they can only get them around 2 or 3 properties. Okay, then they have to shift to a second tier lender. They can probably get another 2 or 3 more. Right now, if your existing loans are structured correctly in your first and second tier lenders, then you'll jump into your third tier lenders, right? Where depending on how you structure these loans in your first and second tier lenders, is very beneficial for your third tier lenders. Okay, so these third tier lenders, I'm talking about, Pepper, I'm talking about Liberty, etc. Okay, so once you're capped out with these lenders on your third tier lender, your Peppers and your Liberty, there's actually another lender, which is what I call scraping the bottom of the barrel, right? Look, Liberty, you're already scraping the bottom of the barrel, but there's even more scraping at the bottom of the barrel if you go to a fourth tier lender. Okay, so the biggest difference with all these lenders is actually rate. Okay, so look, with your second tier lender, you're probably looking at a difference of around 0.5%, right? So that's not that bad, right? When you can get an extra two properties that grow by 5, 6, 7, 8, 9%, right? Whatever you want to call it. Okay, but when you're using third tier lenders, the rates are going to be a little bit more higher. Okay, so you're probably looking at right now interest only. You're looking at anywhere between, call it 6.5% all the way up to 7.2%. Okay. And some of these third tier lenders will actually charge you an extra loading because you're a professional investor. Okay. So when you're using your third and fourth tier lenders, you have to watch out the loan is sustainable, because if your rate on that property is going to be 7.5, okay, and your rental yield is only 5%, and that's gross rental yield, by the way. So if you take away all the expenses and all that, you're probably left with around 4.2 to 4.5% net yield, right? So if you're borrowing at 7% or 7.5% and your net rental yield is 4.2 to 4.5, you got a big gap that you have to cover yourself, right? And that's what you call cash outlay, negative gearing out of your own pocket. So what we see with a lot of our clients is they more than likely stop at your second tier lenders. Okay, so the last 12 to 18 months, we actually haven't been using third and fourth tier lenders too much. We sort of capped at your second tier lenders. Some clients, they may dabble one property with a third tier lender, but that's about it, because they understand the sustainability of maintaining that loan is just too hard because there's just too much cash outlay. Remember what I just said, right? If your cost of funds are 7% and your net rental yield is at 4.2 to 4.5%, you got a big gap right there. Okay, so it's actually very hard to sustain and pull extra money out of your own pocket to cover the repayments, right? So that's why we actually have a lot of clients that will just go with first and second tier lenders only, and they know when to stop. Okay, so if you are interested in using second, third, and fourth tier lenders, like I just said just before, there's a video up here, a full video that I just done that will show you how many properties and what is going to be your borrowing power if you structure your loans correctly and use these third and fourth tier lenders. Okay, now, so some clients don't mind using the third tier lenders because they can afford it, essentially, right? But more importantly is they understand if their income increases significantly and there's a few rate drops, they can potentially move back to a second tier lender. Okay, but the problem is if you cap yourself too much with your third and fourth tier lenders, it's very hard to refinance back to a second or third tier lender. And the reason why I say that is, well, for example, a major lender, you can probably borrow around 5 to 5.5 times your income right now. With a second tier lender, you can probably borrow around 6 to 7 times your income right now. Now, if you structure these loans correctly, you can probably borrow around 9 to 10 times your income with a third tier and a fourth tier lender. So if you're already borrowing 9 to 10 times your income with these third and fourth tier lenders, with a major lender, you can only borrow around 5 to 5.5 times your income. Then therefore, it's going to be very hard to refinance back to a major or second tier lender unless your income increases significantly. Okay, so that's the pitfall. That's why a lot of brokers out there don't explain the risk involved in using a third and fourth tier lenders, right? And that's why a lot of my clients do not use these lenders, because they understand it's just too risky for them. And another structure what a lot of people use and they hope to use or they want to dab into is a trust structure. Now, I'm not going to get into details too much because I've got a full video up here that explains step by step how a trust structure works, okay? And it could be beneficial for a lot of people as long as you know there is no tax benefits that gets passed back into your individual name, okay? So watch the full video because it will show you the benefits, but also shows you the cons of going under trust structure. Okay, so those are the two ways a lot of people accumulate properties. Now, what I say to a lot of people is if you're trying to accumulate property today, it's very hard to accumulate a lot of properties. But that also depends on what sort of properties you're buying. Are you trying to buy 10 times $600,000 properties? Or are you trying to buy 10 times $250,000 to $300,000 properties, right? So I got a client that's 35, okay, and she's actually accumulated 12 properties the last 5 years, right? But you have to understand, she didn't purchase high value properties. All her properties that was purchased the last 5 years were all around 180 to about $250,000 because all she cared about was the rental yield. She didn't care about the capital growth. So her goal is to get properties with high rental yield at a lower price point, hopefully pay them off by the time she retires and she can live off all the rental income from all 10 properties. That's all she cared about. She didn't care about capital growth. So if you want to accumulate 10 properties and you want to brag and you want to tell everybody that you have 10 properties, this is one way you can potentially do it. But the only thing is you can't tell them the value of your properties because that probably means nothing to them. But if you're trying to accumulate 10 properties today at $500,000 each, for example, using first, second, third, and fourth tier lenders, or even a trust structure, you have to understand your cash flow, right? Because these days, the property prices are so high and the rental yields are starting to get low. If you're borrowing 100% of the purchase price plus cost from your equity, then more than likely you're going to be negative geared, right? So for example, if each property you're going to be negative geared $1,000 right now every month, well, if you're going to try to accumulate 10 properties, that's 10 times 1,000. That's 10,000 a month that you're negative geared, right? If I times that by 12, that's 120,000 after tax a year. That's substantially more than your annual salary, right? So yes, the idea of having 10 properties is fantastic, but what is sustainable, what is viable, and what you can afford are two different things. Okay? So for you first-time and ambitious investors out there, don't worry about all the noise around you, people talking about they got 5, 10, 15, 20 properties, or even one or two. Just worry about yourself, right? Because that's all it matters. You just have to worry about yourself. What they do and what they invest in their strategy might be completely different to what you want to do. So you don't need to compare other people based on how many properties they have, because these guys that like to talk about how many properties they have, they like to brag, humble brag, show off, make themselves feel big, or try to make you feel smaller. Okay, so look, I don't have 10 properties myself, but I have a few very good properties, and that's all I need, right? I don't need to buy 20 properties because number one, if I buy 20 properties today, there's no way I can sustain it. Okay, maybe even buying 10 properties today, there's no way I can sustain it. All right. So just worry about yourself. Okay. So as always, everyone, thanks for joining me on another episode of the Mortgage Chat. I hope you enjoyed this video today. Like I said to you, please watch the video up here that shows you how we can use first, second, and third tier, and even fourth tier lenders to boost up your borrowing power and boost up your portfolio with buying under your individual name. Or you can use the trust structure video up here that can help you out and allow you to keep borrowing under different trust structures so you can start accumulating more properties under certain entities and sticking with a major lender. So there you have it. Please stay in tune. Please watch out for my YouTube video because there's going to be a lot more interesting videos that we're going to come up next, especially where to invest next. Peace.